Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Above the Bar podcast, where each week we belly up to the bar with a new guest, find out what they do, who they are, and what makes them great. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the Above the Bar podcast. It's your host, Sean. We have bellied up on this pre-New Year's Eve, pre-4th of July Eve. I don't know. How would you say? I don't know how you would say it. It's like it's the eve of the 4th. My only dad joke for today, I'll ask our guest here in a moment because I only have one good 4th of July dad joke. I don't normally have dad jokes, even though I am a dad. But joining us all the way from the frozen, I'm going to say it's like the coldest place that you shouldn't be cold in, but they're always cold there. So, and if you've never been, and it will never make sense to you, make sure you pack a sweatshirt and a jacket. So joining us all the way from the San Francisco Bay Area, it's Judge Mary Beth O'Connor.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me.
They get cheers and everything. So I would like everyone to address her as Your Honor today. That is all I want to hear from anyone is Your Honor. So here's my only dad joke for today. In England, do they have 4th of July?
Well, they have a 4th of July. I mean, the day exists, yeah.
That's it. See, most people go, no, they don't celebrate 4th of July. So then what calendar do they use? Only dad joke for this. But Mary Beth is joining us. And for those of you that as you catch the episode, we are talking about her history, dealing with trauma, going through the trauma that she experienced, starting all the way at age 12, all the way through, I mean, some pretty harrowing things up until age 32 where, and I have to figure this out because I don't know if she was a judge before then or after then, but nonetheless, she becomes a judge. She's gone through this trauma. She has a book. She has a website, and we'll be scrolling this website along the bottom. So if you want to check that out in the process, if I can get my mouse to work, you can. Man, my computer is fighting me today. Why? I don't know. Here we go. So you can check that out. But before we get into all those kind of things, let's go ahead and take care of some of the important stuff, get some house cleaning done. As always, folks, over my right shoulder, you got the big board for Sticker and a Cause. So maybe you believe in something, you support something, you have your own podcast, radio show, band. I don't care what it is. You could be a professional underwater basket weaver and you need to let people know about it. Reach out to me on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, X, Instagram, TikTok, even our website, the AboveTheBarPodcast.com. Let me know what you got going on. We'll read about it all live right here on the air. Let everybody know what you got happening. And we'll put your sticker right here on the board. So just reach out. Let us know what you got happening, folks. But that being said, this would actually, so our sponsors, I think, would be somebody very important for Mary Beth right now, since it is so cold there. She could use some heavy drapery. Y'all think I'm kidding when I say San Francisco is cold. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that are like, yeah, I went there and I was like in shorts and a t-shirt and got back by the bay and it was like 65 degrees, 60 degrees. They're like, this isn't right. Am I right, Mary Beth?
I will tell you that when we see people with shorts and a t-shirt in June or July, we say tourist.
Like there's no doubt in your mind who that person. I respect that completely. So make sure you're but our sponsors, Budget Blinds of East Greenbush and Budget Blinds of Hudson and Coxsackie, New York, America and North America's largest international window treatment company. Everything that you could ever imagine, whether it be shutters, drapes, but in Mary Beth's case, maybe she needs to look into some doggone motorized honeycomb shades. They are the number one insulator that you can have for your windows. And even more so, Budget Blinds carries lines like Lutron and Hunter Douglas. And Hunter Douglas right now is actually one of only 2 companies in the U.S. where when you buy their honeycomb shades, 30% of the product cost up to $1,200 can be counted as an energy efficiency credit. So make sure you're reaching out to your local Budget Blinds. And if you're in the capital region, let them know you're there to belly up to the bar, and they're going to give you a 15% discount. But I will tell you, this month they're running a sale 25% off of all motorization. So make sure you reach out to the folks at Budget Blinds of East Greenbush and Budget Blinds of Hudson and Coxsackie, New York. All right, Mary Beth, Your Honor, we're all done. I love it when she laughs when I call her Your Honor. She's like, don't do that. But it's hilarious because she's like, how long?
Well, I will tell you a funny story. When I was appointed a judge, my husband said to me, he said, do I have to call you Your Honor from now on? And I was like, well, you don't have to, you know.
You should have been like, yes, you do. And then you could have been like, just so you understand, because I just watched this the other day. They were talking about Kamala Harris's husband is referred to as the second man. Did you know that?
I couldn't remember. If you would have said to me, what do they call him? I would have knew the word man is in there, but second man wouldn't have been on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. So well, it just sounded funny the way you said it, Your Honor. Second man wouldn't have been on the tip of your tongue, huh? I had to give it that one. So, but seriously, now I want to get into this. So you were a judge for how long?
I was the judge for 5.5 years.
Okay.
And the reason it is so short is because I didn't go to law school until I got sober. So I didn't get sober until I was 32, and we can talk about what led up to that. And I went to law school at 6.5 years sober. And then I worked at a big law firm, and then I did class action work for the federal government. I always emphasize at 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal administrative law judge. And then I did it for 5.5 years and took early retirement. And then I'm happy to talk about what I'm doing now, but that's the judicial arc.
So, well, I want to get into that. So I started with alcohol at age 12.
Yes.
So that's not normal.
No.
So let's start there for a minute, because I think what a lot of people, everybody thinks that their trauma is unique to them, and nobody understands what I'm going through. And I think that's a lot of our mindsets, because it's ours. So nobody can understand me. But I also like to have people open up and say, like, hey, you're not alone. Somebody else, you're not the first person. So at age 12 to start drinking, what drove that?
Yeah, I mean, and you're right, because I see the short version of my story is child abuse led to childhood addiction. And that is not an uncommon story, unfortunately.
No.
That is a very common way. If somebody's abusing drugs to excess in their teenage years, it's usually either trauma and or untreated mental health. It's usually one of those two things. And so for me, it started bad from the beginning. I was actually left at a convent for the first 6 months of my life. I didn't live with my family. And then when I moved in with my mother and the man she had married who adopted me, he was nice, but my mother was very chaotic. She could be violent. But when I was 9, it just got much worse because she married my stepfather, and he was very violent with her, and he was physically, sexually violent with me. It was just a high stress household. Like just as sort of a little example, I was 9, my sister was 7, and we had to put the dishes away out of the dishwasher. Like that was one of our chores. And I taught my sister, after I realized who I was dealing with in my stepfather, I taught her to put the dishes away one dish at a time so they didn't clack. Like that was sort of the level of stress and strain that we were living under. And yeah, I'd like to say that it's a unique story, but it's not a unique story at all.
Wow. Like just even that could have triggered a bad situation that night.
Yes.
So by age 12, you would turn to drink.
Yes, that's right. It was my first drug was alcohol, which was common first drug in my day. And it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine.
Strawberry Fields, Boone's Farm? Look, I used to say back home in Baltimore where I grew up, you could always tell a good wine by the crack of the cap.
Well, I will tell you this. My girlfriend rode it over on her banana seat bicycle, and we drank it out of Flintstones glasses. They used to have grape jelly in them. Like this is
wow.
But that was my first exposure, but it really caught my attention because I felt so much better. It was sort of like my muscles relaxed, and I was giggling in like a more joyful and honest way, and I just felt happy, and I focused on this, like, oh my gosh, this is like a really positive experience. I need more of this. And so it was just the beginning, but I kept pursuing it because it helped me feel it helped me release the tension and the fear and the stress that I was clenching onto.
Now, I mean, but I got to ask this because going from a drink at 12 to meth at 16 to shooting up at 17, that's a pretty big jump. Now, let me ask this for a second. Did you grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area?
No, I grew up in Central Jersey.
Okay, so you're an East Coast girl.
Yes.
You know, the land of milk and honey out here on the East Coast, you know, where we do things right, and it isn't 3 states that take up the entire thing. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I like the East Coast. I'm an East Coast guy.
Yeah.
But so how do we make that jump? I mean, that's going from this is numbing things to I want to kill it all. Like, how do we make that jump?
I mean, but it was 4 years between the first sip of alcohol and the first snort of meth. So, a lot can happen in 4 years. And I mean, first I added in, well, first of all, I pursued alcohol, right? I mean, I was looking for opportunities to drink, making opportunities. I would even steal beer from my dangerous stepfather because that's how much I wanted it.
It was worth it. It was worth it to take a shot at it.
It was worth it to take the risk. And then I added in weed, which we called pot in my day. There were pills around. There were a lot of downers and a little bit of stimulants, but mostly downers. There was a lot of acid. 4-way window pane was the big acid in my day. I did a lot of that my sophomore year.
I've never even heard. I've heard of different acids. I've never heard of 4-way window pane.
Yep. It was a paper acid, and it was divided. It was a square, and it was divided into 4. And so each one of like a window pane has, the line.
Gotcha.
Yes. And so each dose was 1, but we used to. I mean, I don't think I ever did 1. Usually it was 2 or 3, but that's that's what we all did. And then when I was 16, I got my first exposure to meth, and it was also in Central Jersey. This is like 1977. I mean, methamphetamine existed, but it wasn't around in my area in any kind of volume. This was like the first big wave of easy access to meth. And so it was readily available. All the druggies were very excited, about this new.
Yay!
Hey, we got meth, and so it was, my group of people, the people I hung out with, all started doing it, and I started doing it quicker to access, and I was shooting it up within 6 months. And in the senior year of high school, I was completely out of control in full bore addiction.
I mean, Mary Beth, meth. Back then that was what they were calling it, crank back then. If I remember.
Crank, yes, that's what we. In fact, crank is in the first line of my book. I referenced it.
If I had to think about, that's an East Coast thing, like calling it crank. Like, I don't think anybody even refers to it that way. That's serious. So and the meth habit wasn't like, all right, I did a little bit of meth. That involved your life for, what are we doing the math here? 14 years? Am I doing the math right?
Yeah. I did better for a while. So let's put it this way. The people, sometimes people say, did your parents notice? No, they didn't notice. But I will say that other druggies were telling me that I was out of control, that I used to lie and pretend I had taken a break so that I could get more drugs. Oh yeah, I slept for 3 days. I took a good break.
I'm good. I'm fine.
Fine.
Bring it on.
Ready to go. And so, I was, sort of known as being on the excessive end, even among the drug group that was using meth. But I did go to college. I came to California. I graduated from Berkeley. And for the first 3.5 years of college, I did better with drugs. And I better and good, 2 different words, but I did do better. I didn't do that much meth. It wasn't really around for a while. A little bit of cocaine, a lot of alcohol, a lot of chaos, pills, mushrooms, hallucinogens, but it was more contained. It was mostly on the weekends, sometimes during the week. And so it was better. But I had this really, vicious kidnapping and 6-hour rape by 3 men in college.
Hold on, pause. You're not allowed to. Listen. Hold on. Wait a sec. Hold on. You don't get to brush that off, Mary Beth.
Yeah.
You don't get to be like, so I was kidnapped, held in captivity for 6 hours. How did that even? I'm sorry we haven't got into like the book yet, but how does that even play in?
Yeah, I mean, so I was living in LA at the time, and I was at a bus stop, and this van was like, these two guys I thought would come around, and they were chatting me up, hey, you want to ride? No, I'm good, but yeah, and it was like, they seem friendly, and it's funny because with my violence history, on one hand I can be hyper vigilant at times, and on the other sometimes I don't recognize the threat, and in this case I did not recognize the threat, and I got in the van, and it turned out there weren't two, there were three. There was one of them in the back, and he sort of came from behind. I didn't even know it was there, grabbed me. I mean, it was a nightmare, and I really believed I was going to die. Like, I mean, I really thought, this is it, this is it for me. But it was interesting because in a way, my violence history helped me stay calm. Like, I was able to, I didn't scream or yell because it wasn't
Right.
good help. I really was able to sort of watch them and try to figure out what was going on, like who was in charge, what were the dynamics, playing it up like we were just all having a good time, like, I'll do whatever you want me to do, and so, but it was a long haul. It was 6 hours is a long time.
Yeah, look, 6 minutes is a long time in a stressful situation like that. But and this is all still, you're at Berkeley, that whole world.
I was in college. Yeah, I was in college during it. Yeah.
Is that the Reagan era of California?
No, he was president because it was after 1980. So
Okay, so you're Reagan presidency. I always think of Reagan Berkeley era when he was kind of like, he lambasted the president of Berkeley about like, you can't control your university. What is your problem over here?
That's right. And sending the National Guard. That was in the late 60s.
Okay. All right. Say, I'm not up on all my California. And folks, if you're just joining us, please take a moment, check out what Mary Beth has going on junkie2judge.com. Give a like, share, follow with all this information. If you have questions, please send those questions in. So all this is going on. So this is feeding your trauma. I mean, this really is feeding your trauma. And I mean, I want to kind of get into your mindset for a second. So what was your mindset about you as a person during all this?
I mean, it really made me feel like, because I had left New Jersey to come to California sort of to try to kick off a new start, and I felt like, what's wrong with me that I can't get away from the violence, like, and this wasn't my first rape, and so it's like, who has this, this many sexual assaults, the child abuse. I felt like I was never going to get free of it. And then I chose to move in with a violent boyfriend who I, knew had violent tendencies, which is not an uncommon reaction to living in a traumatic childhood. And so I felt really stuck in it. I felt like there was just no realistic path of it ending. And it just raised all those feelings again, and all the desire to shut down my emotions, the desire, to try to stifle the pain. But I did better for a little bit after that, but I just couldn't hang on to it. It's like, I just couldn't hang on to my grip. It was just too much. And then I started really using meth again at the end of college, and I used until I was 32. So it was part of the trigger to sort of reach for the meth again, which is really biologically, for whatever reason, the drug that fit me best. As I say, I was very committed to meth. Like, you could put all the drugs on the table, and that
was your one.
That was my one. That was my one, for whatever biological reason.
Well, it also kind of, as I'm hearing this, I mean, were you working during, get done college? You obviously graduated from college,
Yes.
Were you working through this addiction? Like, were you a function, like, for lack of a better term, I don't have a better one. We talk about functioning alcoholics, but were you a functioning meth addict?
No. So in college, when I was using, way more than other people, but not as bad for me. I did, I was in college, and I was, went to top tier college. It was hard. And I was working half time. I'm a blue collar girl. I didn't have any money to help me out. And so I was fairly disciplined for those 3.5 years. But by the time I graduated college and meth had started up again, I had started up with meth again. The next 10 years, I was not functional. I mean, my term is I worked my way down the corporate ladder. Because I ended
up in the mailroom at the end of my career.
I So when I went to rehab at 32 with a Berkeley degree and good grades, I was doing word processing, and I could only hold it for 9 months. Because I was using meth and I couldn't get there, and I would miss days, and I go for lunch and not come back. All the usual drug addict
Right.
stuff, and I was also just in a very miserable place. So now I was functional for the 3.5 years of college, and I was increasingly less functional for the next 10 years after that.
So you get through this. What is the, and this is probably a cliche question, but I'm okay with those. What was the wake up? Actually, let me pause that before we even get that. And I got to ask this, it seems like it would be logical. Any children during those times? Did you have kids during, I just feel like, and I know that again, might seem like a cliche thing to happen to somebody, but as a woman involved in that culture, so you never had kids, nothing like that happened to you?
I never had kids, no.
Okay. I was just curious because you hear those stories, that's the catalyst that moves them into sobriety. So then what was your catalyst that moved you into that circle of sobriety?
I mean, for me, it was multiple factors, and I think that's often the case. And so I couldn't hold a job, right? When I got laid off, I got fired again from that word processing job. I was so debilitated, I couldn't even put a resume together again. And I was in despair. I was depleted. I felt trapped. And then also my partner was ready to throw me out. Like he was done with me. And so it was sort of everything together that made me say, well, maybe I ought to go to rehab.
So you actually went to a legit rehab, not one of these what's the movie Basketball Diaries where he locks him in the closet and doesn't let him out while he just detoxes in this violent. So you actually went through a rehab process.
I went to rehab. It was a longer term program for women in the Bay Area. It was 90 days minimum, although I stayed a little longer, but it was good in some ways, but it also was not a great fit for me because it was vehemently and adamantly exclusively 12-step, which, is AA and NA. And I didn't know that when I went there. And I mean, I support 12 steps when it's the right fit, but it was not the right fit for me. So I ended up in a rehab that only offered one option, and it was an option that wasn't a good fit. So there was that was a surprise. that was a problem.
I can see that. We got a few more people just popped up. Look, folks, we're talking to former junkie to Judge Mary Beth O'Connor. If you got questions, you're curious about her story, you have something you want to input with us, please let us know. Also, please share this around to other places. Her website is junkie2judge.com. I had it backwards when we were talking earlier. junkie2judge.com. So then what program, and I love the fact that you're look, 12-step is good for this person. Something else is good for somebody else. This is not a one size fits all kind of thing. Because I think a lot of people think oh, it's one size fits all. So what was the process that worked for you?
So when I found out that they were only offering me 12 steps and I knew it wouldn't be a good fit, but they wouldn't even let me raise questions. They kept telling me that I was self-will run amok and I was arrogant and things like that. And but I believed them, right? Because they were the experts. And so I thought, well, I got to look for the parts I can use. So, I mean, I read all the AA Big Book. I read all the NA texts. I did all the homework, and participated in rehab. And I just tried to filter the ideas to see, is there a core part of it that I can use? And so that's how I started. So for example, the powerless step of 12 steps, I didn't agree with that. But I thought about it and I thought, well, what I can agree is that I am powerless to moderate. There's no moderating for me, right? And so I tried to do that, but I still was really afraid because they told me repeatedly I was going to fail. I mean, they literally said, you're going to fail. Do what we tell you, do everything we tell you, do this program or you're going to fail. And so it was scary to sort of try to trust my own judgment when I had the last 10 years of, working my way down the corporate ladder and making poor decisions. Right. But I knew what they were offering wasn't right for me. And so at first I just tried to look for the pieces that I could use. That was how it started. But when I got home from rehab, then I found other options.
Gotcha. Now I got to tell you also though, so you get yourself together, you're able to use pizza the program. And I'm kind of just looking over my notes here. The other side to this is, Mary Beth, that's a pretty bold, you're only the second person that I know, and maybe it's just becoming a lawyer, Like you have to have like traumatic things happen in your life to become a lawyer, to feel like that's the path I have a very close friend, Jeff, who at age 16 was incarcerated for 16 years for a rape and murder he did not commit, was exonerated, was completely found. And, you're a judge and, you're not a criminal judge, but if you were to read what happened in his life, you'd be like, this is some stuff out of a movie. Like they did what? They held him. But when he got out, he became a lawyer. So I know why he did it, but I got to ask, like, for yourself to get into law and decide, you know what, I've got this degree from Berkeley. It's an all right school. It's all right. I mean, my uncle graduated from Berkeley music, but I mean, it's all right. I guess it's okay. I mean, I guess it's all right. I'm kidding, folks. If you know Berkeley, it's a very prestigious college. But I mean, what made you say, like, okay, I'm gonna go be a judge now, or I'm gonna go be a lawyer now, not necessarily a judge, but go be a lawyer?
Was definitely not a judge, but so what for me, with all the chaos of my childhood, the one sort of positive experience I had was school. I always did really well in school. I got a lot of positive attention at school. It was like I was seen and valued for sort of some of my natural characteristics. So I always had school, but so I go to college and I did well in college. And then I was actually accepted to law school right out of college at Berkeley Law.
Oh, wow.
But remember, I started using meth again in the middle of my senior year of college. So by the time I got to law school in the fall, I was in no shape to do it. Like I couldn't
You were
get
just strung
there.
out at that point.
I was strung out. I was missing weeks at a time. I couldn't get there. I couldn't focus. And so I gave back a top 10 law school because of my addiction. I withdrew and I handed it back, and it was agonizing. I mean, it was horrible. I hated it. And then I hated to drive by the building. I mean, it was just this sort of underlying agony that I had to give that back. And I knew I gave it back because I was using. That's why I was unable to do it. So that was in 84 when I went to law school, sort of. It didn't go to law school. I was at Berkeley. I wouldn't say I went to law school.
I was hanging out there with people who would eventually become lawyers.
And only infrequently was I hanging out there. And so when I got out of rehab and I came home, I had this Berkeley degree and I had good grades, but I had like an embarrassing resume. I mean, embarrassing. So like my first professional goal was, let's not get fired again. Like that's what's really.
Let's start there. Let's start with being able to hold this job.
Yeah, let's start
for longer
with
than 9 months.
Yes, and that was my first goal. And so my first job was actually a part-time, low-level, temporary administrative job. Because honestly, for me to like get up and go every day on time and stay all the hours and do that the next day and the next, it was new behavior for me. I needed time to sort of get my feet.
You got to train yourself.
Yes, to build that habit up and to really, have that experience. And so then my second job was a permanent mid-level full-time administrative job, and my third job was a supervisory job at a larger company where I got a promotion. And now I'm like 5 years into sobriety, and then I started thinking about law school. Should I try? Because I was also getting older. I mean, I got sober at 32, so now I'm in my late 30s. But it was scary for me because I didn't want to. I didn't want to have to explain what happened last time, right? Like, there was no good explanation. There was no good explanation.
There's no way to be like, listen, the Hells Angels had brought in some hella meth at this point. They had a hell of a cook. What was I supposed to do? Like, you can't explain that to the law professor now.
No, there was no good explanation. But at this, and I also feel like I was getting older to that either I do it or I admit I'm not going to do it. You know what I mean? It was sort of like getting to that point.
It was your shit or get off the pot moment.
Yes, it was. And so I took the admissions test again and I applied. And Berkeley actually didn't take me back, but I went to Hastings, which is it's like a top 40 law school. It's a good school.
Yeah.
But I was number 3 in my class of 400 my first year, and then Berkeley took me back. And so I actually did graduate from Berkeley Law School, but 16 years later.
This is for you again.
Yeah. So
More applause. Look at Joe.
That was a cherry. It was a cherry on the, on the cap. I mean, I went to law school at 6.5 years sober, and I was able to focus, and do it and be disciplined and do what I needed to do. And so But yeah, it was a real joy to get it back. I never thought I would. So that was the law school. Now I still wasn't thinking judge, but that was the law school.
Well, what kind of law did you practice?
I was a litigator, so lawsuits. I worked at a big law firm. I did class action and complex business litigation there, and then I went to work for the federal government, and I did a variety of class actions defense for the federal government.
Now, and we're going to get into the book here in a minute. Again, folks, if you're just joining us, we got Judge Mary Beth O'Connor on. She has a website, junkie2judge.com. She has a book. Her book is actually called From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, BAM, IndieBound, bunch of different other sites. Pretty much you Google it and you'll find it. It'll pop up. But so one of the things that I think a lot of folks that have gone through what you've gone through, and what I love about it is you approach it like, I'm not unique. I'm not special. This is not a one-off story. I'm just like everybody else. It's just, this was my path to recovery. This is how I made it happen. In your path though, was there ever a time where, you're sober, you're 6.5 years sober, where you felt like it came up in employer conversations, and you either felt like, well, I guess I got to own up to this, or was it always like, nah, it's none of your business. I'm not there yet.
It's when for the first time it really could have come up is when I applied to the Bar of California. And to be a lawyer, you have to get licensed by the Bar Association, right? But they don't ask you, did you ever do drugs in your life? They ask, did you in the last 5 years, have you had a problem with drugs? And I had like 10 years sober at that point, right? And so then when I was became a federal employee, I think they asked about 7, and I had like 14. So I was always ahead of what they were asking about. And so I could tell the truth and not tell them. And I did view it as not their business. I mean, with all my employers, I thought, I didn't tell you I was raped either. It's just not relevant, but the first time I told an employer was when I was a judge. I went on the board. I joined the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery, and that's an outside activity. So I had to run it through ethics. So I had to tell them what I was doing. And in that, explanation, I said I had I have 23 years of sobriety. I said, but I didn't say what drug or go into details.
You said you were sober.
I was sober for 23 years, and here's what I'm going to be doing for this organization, to run it through ethics. So that was the first time I told an employer. But it's part of the reason I talk now, because I'm retired now, and I don't have to worry like so many people do about the professional ramifications.
Absolutely.
So I can tell my whole story and not have to filter it or censor it or worry about, what if somebody finds out? And so it gives me a freedom, that a lot of people don't feel they have when they're working. They worry. They have legitimate fears about professional ramifications.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't imagine, some of the career paths that I had, I couldn't imagine because the time frames, but I agree with you. Honestly and truthfully, guess what, folks? I don't think it's most employers' business. Unless you're bringing it to my doorstep at that moment. It stop judging people on what they have done. Figure out what they're doing. That's just my thing. So you retire in, was it 94? Did I read that right?
No, I retired in 2020.
Oh, 2020. So what did I read about 1994? Maybe I might have.
That's my sobriety date. That's my sobriety date. I just had 30 years of continuous.
Okay, maybe that was it.
Yes.
What's the date?
January 13th, 94.
Nice job. So nice job. So maybe that was what I was reading. I remember just reading 94, and I thought I read 94 and retired. She retired from drugs in January.
That's 13th. Right. That's right.
That was it. You've got 2 retirements, one from drugs, and then one from the legal system. I like that. I think that. Listen, you can use that. You retire because I think that sounds better. Like, sobriety has, and maybe this is just me. Like, sobriety has like a negative connotation. Like, people want to approach that and be like, oh, you're sober? What was it? But if you told somebody, hey, I've retired twice, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I retired once from using drugs and then from the legal system. People would be like, what'd you say? Because it's a positive. We look at retirement in a positive tone.
Well, I will say, like on that point, when I talk to newcomers, sometimes I really say, I think that it helps if you don't say I can't use this drug or drugs. It helps to say I'm choosing not to, and it's
Right.
all the truth. You are choosing not to, and that's a much more affirmative statement, and it's a much more empowered statement. I
I love it.
choose not to.
See, I love the sound of that. Like I've chose not to do these things. I've retired from these things. All that has a way better vibe in my head and a much more positive outlook if you could tell someone like, "Hey, I guess it's time for you to retire from that. Retire from doing that." So you decide though to write a book, and I think it's got to feel natural to kind of get these feelings out on the paper. We talk a lot of people nowadays, if you're into any of the self-help stuff, the big thing is journaling. Hey, you need to journal. You need to write down. And, they go back in the past and you see like, oh, Churchill journaled and Carnegie journaled and this one journaled. Now, that we got a journal. But, this is kind of your journal in a sense. Other than the fact of wanting to get it out with people, what was it like to take it from here where you lived it in your head to out of your hands into that ink? Because now it's out of here and it's permanent.
Yes. Well, so I'll say a couple things. That one is that I was a really excellent legal writer, but when I started thinking about when I was appointed a federal judge, that's really when I started thinking, could my story be abused? Like, is there any value to it? And I had actually not read a lot of memoir, and so I thought, well, I better read some, and see what's out there, because I don't want to write the same book that 22 other people have written. What's the point? And so when I read memoir, I realized, oh my gosh, it's written like a novel. Like, I don't know how to do that, right? So I had to be humble, and I took classes, how to write a good scene, how to write dialogue, how to get emotion in. And I went to writers' conferences, and I was in critique groups. So I worked hard at the writing skill set side of it. And so that was one. And I found that to be actually an enjoyable intellectual exercise. Like, how do you figure out how to write a good book? There's, that's a challenge. It's something new I hadn't done. It was a new challenge. And I like that. But from the emotion side, it was interesting because one of the things we haven't talked about yet is the trauma recovery. And for me, when I got sober, I had to also deal with my trauma. I always knew that the abuse was under my drug use. In my day, we called it abuse, not trauma. Today, it would be complex PTSD. But anyway, when I got home from therapy, from rehab, I did find a therapist who had expertise in trauma. And she did correctly diagnose me with PTSD, to my surprise. I didn't know you could have PTSD. Nice. As a war vet. I thought any war vets had PTSD, but for me, it showed up as really severe anxiety. And so I was in therapy for a long time. It took me many years longer to get my PTSD and anxiety under reasonable control than it did to get my substance use disorder under reasonable control. Many years longer. And I don't want to scare anybody, because it was, incrementally better. Right. But I was in therapy for first individual for 3 years, and then group therapy of women with trauma histories for 6. So
that shouldn't scare anybody. That was your journey.
Right. And the truth is that many of us walk into sobriety recovery, drug recovery, alcohol recovery with some other mental health condition that also needs to be addressed. Right. And so that's very common. A lot of people have depression or anxiety or some trauma history. So it's very common to have to tackle both. So I had done a lot of work, but by the time I was writing the book, there was a gap in time. Like, I hadn't been in therapy for a number of years. And so it was sort of like a fresh-eyed view again on it, and seeing some things and some threads as I wrote about them in detail that really made me process things in a new way. It was sort of another step of healing. Even though I had come really far, it did add another layer to my understanding when I was writing the book.
I'm going to make a left turn for a moment here with something that you mentioned about, initially when you first things happened to you, we'd have just called it a traumatic event or a trauma. Now we add that label to it. And this is more opinionated, do you feel like because we label things so much, that that trauma piece, because I still think it's traumatic. It's a traumatic event, but that traumatic PTSD, like going from trauma to PTSD, I think a lot of people don't realize you can go from trauma to nothing or trauma to PTSD. I think a lot of people don't realize that. They just think, well, I had a traumatic event, I must have this.
Oh yeah, no.
Do you think that a lot of times with the WebMD self-diagnosis world that we live in, like we're all dying instantaneously, we all have, Ebola, Infantago, and everything else. Do you think that actually affects the trauma recovery process? And what I mean by that is some people aren't willing to even come forth that have true trauma and PTSD because they're concerned, like, I'm just going to be viewed like this emo fool on the internet that really had nothing, as far as I'm concerned, had nothing. I've had something serious happen. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I will say that for me to be given the term and explain why, and it put a lot of my symptoms in context, right? I mean,
It was huge for you.
it made sense to me. But I will also say that, you're right that you and I could go through the same event and our reaction to it would be different. And one of the reasons for me is that I had violence ongoing, and that the ongoing nature increases the likelihood that you're going to develop a condition like anxiety or PTSD. And so if you had a fairly healthy, if you were fairly in a fairly healthy place, and then something a big, traumatic event happens, you're more likely to recover without long-term consequences, for years and years, than if you already were vulnerable or not as strong of a place because you had other events already. So that's part of it. But when I went into that group of women with trauma histories, which was basically all child abuse and sexual assaults, and violent boyfriends, right? That was actually a friggin' eye opener for me. I mean, it was really helpful because they were like further along in the recovery than I was. And so they were tying their current behaviors and their current reactions back to their history in ways that I hadn't yet tied it. And once I understood it, I could sort of more effectively tackle it, more efficiently tackle it. But it is a complicated process. And you're right. It's an individualized process as to how deep the pain goes, as to what the symptomology is, as to how you can recover, what's going to work for you to recover, and all of that.
It's just very interesting to me because, I mean, you just seem like the type of person to me. And I mean, and this is a huge compliment. I feel like that, once you were able to recognize, you could say, okay, this is what I have. I can accept what I have, and weren't looking to label it. Like, you didn't want to label it, is what I feel like. Am I seeing that right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't worry so much about the label as I worried about the symptoms, and the symptoms. I mean, they did last a really long time. It took me. I was always. It was the anxiety. It was almost crippling for me at times. It's like I was making the right choices and I was doing the right next thing, but in some ways, I wasn't really enjoying my life because I was always so anxious about what was going to happen tomorrow. Like I was always waiting for the next explosion.
Where's the next shoe dropping?
Yes. And so I couldn't really enjoy things. Like when I would get my grades, let's say, okay, great. Okay. So I got really good grades. Well, and that's a surprise, but you know what? But this time, this time is going to go bad, right? Like I never had any trust. My husband showed me a cover of this comic book, and it was a woman and she's crying and there's a man talking to her. And in the background, it's Mary Beth Day. Like there's a parade for Mary Beth Day. And she's holding like a winning $1 million lottery ticket. And she, it was her, and she just got the job she wanted, and she's crying, and the guy says, "What's wrong?" And she's crying. She says, "But what about tomorrow?"
Listen, I get that completely, and the fact that your husband used a comic book makes him one of my new BFFs, because I love comic books, so I appreciate that. And look, folks, we're getting close to closing the bar here soon. We're talking with former judge Mary Beth O'Connor. JunkieToJudge.com is her website. Her book being, and I'll read this title, From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. So in your writing process, I want to go back to that for a second. was there anything in the book? Because right now, talking to you, you seem like such an open person that I feel like if I was like, so, Your Honor, tell me about, how much don't take it, how much you enjoyed doing meth the first time. Like, and you would be like, listen, it was this, it was like, I feel like you would be that person. But at the same time, was there anything in the book that really like, hey, I've got to finally talk about this, that just paused you and you were like, son of a gun, how am I going to do it?
Well, I will say there was one thing I really wanted to include that isn't in a lot of memoirs because I think it's important to women who abuse substances, and that is there's a chapter called promiscuity. And because it's just even in recovery communities, it's not a common topic. And I think a lot of women feel shame over their sexual behavior when they're using drugs and the choices that they make. And a lot of us trade on I certainly traded on my looks to get drugged. I mean, I'm old now, I was pretty then. Okay. But it's a common experience and there's a lot of judgment around it. And so I really wanted to own up to some of the sexual things that I did that were interplayed with my drug use. And so that was something that I thought carefully about, but I also thought it was important to include.
Now, why do you think, like, I mean, we see it in TV and movies and stuff like that all the time, where men who are in controlling position as drug dealers, and they're always like, hey girl, you want this, what you got to do. Like, we're okay with that. But why is it that you think the opposite side for a woman who's like, look, I'm in this world, that it's treated that way?
Yeah, and I will say that it's usually not like that, at least in my experience. Usually the drug dealers are people that you're around. Like they're people you hang out with for days at a time. It's not like it's, there may be sort of a quiet exchange of sex for drugs, but it's not like some stranger that you're went over and it's like the first time you've interacted with them, right? It's
right.
People. I grew up in a small town in Central Jersey. These are all people that I know. They're all people that hang out with. Some of them, if they would have had meth, would I have had sex with them? Probably not. But I mean, there's just that reality, right? But it wasn't.
Even listen, whoever that person is, I want you to understand. This is a lady who started at 17 years old using meth until 32, and she still said, if you would have had meth, she still wouldn't have touched you. I just want you to know that was what was just said. So whoever you are, if you think it's you, I just want you to know that that's what was just said. That's Mary Beth. That was one of the funniest things I've heard in a long time.
But even in the rooms, there's just a lot of judgment sometimes. And so I really just wanted to stand up and own it and just say, this was my experience. This is what I did. This is what a lot of us do, And the truth is that a lot of guys, if they could have trid sex with a woman for meth, if they're heterosexual, they would have done it, right? They would have done it.
Oh yeah. Like, listen, look, if a heterosexual junkie was like, listen, girl, if I could just get that, they would have done it in a heartbeat. Yes. But it's just, that's not the social dynamic typically of that world. So how about putting the book? I mean, because the reality of it is, listen, I'm not downplaying Amazon, but you can get a book on the Amazon fairly easily in the grand scheme. Barnes and Noble is not so easy. Like Barnes and Noble, like to me, like if you tell me your book's in Barnes and Noble, your book's pretty legit. Like you've done something. What was shopping that book like?
Yeah. So, it's really hard to get memoir published unless you're famous or you have like 1 million Twitter followers, and I was actually I was even on Twitter until after I got the book deal and the publisher pushed me to do it. And I will say, if you're interested in information about substance use and recovery, I provide I don't argue on Twitter, but I provide information like new studies and articles and stuff. And I'm at Mary Beth O _. So my first goal was, can I write a good book? So I really focused on the writing and, doing well with it. And that took me years because it was a hobby. I was a judge. It was a hobby. But then I had to look for an agent. And that's really sort of the first level of somebody's examining whether they think a publisher might actually buy your book. And I ended up at a smaller press, but they're in the recovery and self-help space. And so it was a good fit for me.
So that makes sense. I think, just hit on something. A lot of people write books and they think, well, I'm going to go to Simon and Schuster or Penguin or whoever. And this is a great story. Like, they want this. You were able to find someone who focuses on that niche of what your story was to make it happen.
Yes, I mean, every publisher that turned me down, the bigger publishers, they all said it was a great book, but I didn't have enough what they call platform, right? I didn't have enough followers. I didn't have enough a high level.
Isn't that crazy?
I know. But the other thing is that when I use the book for now is the book is also a tool. I view it as part of my advocacy. So, I'm on the board, like for LifeRing Secular Recovery. I'm on the board.
About that. Tell me about that board.
Yeah, so LifeRing is one of the programs I used. It's a peer support group. We sit in a room and talk just like we would at an AA meeting, but it's got a secular approach to recovery. It's more of a self-empowerment approach. And also we believe in a personal recovery plan, that your recovery plan and my recovery plan are going to be different because we're different people and we are in different places. And so it's focused on we help our members build an individual plan that will work for them. And then I'm on the She Recovers board, which is for substance use, but also trauma recovery, mental health recovery, and other things. But I also speak a lot. Like, I speak at conferences. I created workshops on topics I think are important. I train lawyers and judges. I do continuing legal ed training. And I not only train them about substance use and recovery, but I train them about what the legal profession does wrong, in my opinion, in regard to substance use. But I provide a lot of substantive information for them. Like, literally, like, what is substance use disorder? I swear a lot of times people don't even understand what the definition is. And so that's sort of, I use the book, and I will say I use my judge title and my 30 years of sobriety to sort of package. I think it helps people listen to me a little harder when I talk about topics I think are important. That judge title is sort of a tool at this point that I try to educate. Yeah. You
use that thing. And these back to the first two boards that you were saying that you're a member of, are these national organizations or these local? How, if somebody is out there and hears this or knows somebody in that situation and says, hey, look, they've done the AA, they've done the NA, their step is 13, which is walking out the door. How can they find these organizations?
Yeah, so LifeRing.org, SheRecovers.org, they are national. They don't have face-to-face meetings in every community the way 12 Steps does, but they certainly have a number of face-to-face meetings around the country, but they have a lot of meetings online too. So you can always participate online if there isn't one in your local community.
So there's an ability for somebody to go out there and find that person and get to that person.
Yes. And a lot of people, and I will also say I mixed and matched programs. I didn't just do one. And that's a lot more people do that today. In 94, I didn't know anybody who did that. But today it's got a name. It's called a patchwork plan. And so you don't have to if 12 Steps is helping you, you don't have to give it up to try out a LifeRing meeting or try out a She Recovers meeting. And like She Recovers, 30% of our members also do 12 Steps. So, you are allowed to build the program that works for you, and you can pull ideas from as many places as you find useful.
Well, it just makes sense to me because, if you're trying to build that community of recovery and that community of help for yourself, the more groups, the more people, the more comfort that you can find within those groups makes perfect sense to me. Now, you kind of mentioned about, your speaking engagements. Anything coming up where, if somebody was looking to hear you talk, where could they find you talk?
Yeah, so my website, junketjudge.com, has a list of upcoming engagements. I just got back from a trip, and I'm going to be speaking in Phoenix on July 21st, I believe, and it's on my website. And I'm speaking in the New England. I'm doing a tour in New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine, and those will be coming up in August.
You're skipping New York?
I did New York last year. I did New York last year.
You skipped New York and Vermont, and like, right past us.
I was just in Jersey and Pennsylvania. I just got back last night. So,
out in Jersey. All right. So look, because Nate's not here, and I don't know where he's at. I'm gonna get in his ass this 2 weeks in a row. Nate's a good buddy of mine. He always asks a food question. You're from Jersey. He wouldn't know this question to ask. Is it Taylor Park or Taylor Ham?
It's pork roll. It's pork roll.
I never had pork roll till I moved to just outside of Philly, and I had my first pork roll and egg sandwich.
Yes. On a hard roll, I hope. It better be on a hard roll.
You know what? I don't remember. I want to say it was, but it was like homemade, so it could have been on regular bread. But I'm gonna tell you, we can find it up here. We have tailors up here in the Albany area. I had to bring that up because, like, being from Jersey, like, that's like the one thing. Like, I'm not a big Jersey food guy. Like, I've tried to find good food in Jersey and I fail at it every time. I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know, Judge. Don't judge me for not being able to find good food in Jersey. So you got all these things. Any of these available online if somebody's not in those local areas where they can log in and listen to you talk, or even your book, is it available in an audio version?
So the book is available audio and ebook, Kindle as well. I have some of my speaking recordings on my website, so you can listen or watch some of those. And the one in Arizona actually is going to be broadcast, and so that's the Humanists of Phoenix, the Phoenix Humanist Association is putting that on, and it will be broadcast, and so you can register and watch.
You must and. Judge, I just heard it in your voice. It must be Southern Jersey you're from, because I heard you sound like me from Baltimore with a more mid-Atlantic accent.
Yes.
Because I just was listening and I heard you say something. I don't even know what it was, but I was like, oh, she jacks up the same letters I jack up. like T's become D's and instantaneously. So, Wawa. Do you love a Wawa?
Yeah, Wawa, that's right. Yes, I am from Central Jersey, more to the south. I don't have that North Jersey accent that you hear in movies.
No, you've got a mid-Atlantic accent.
Yeah,
you've got a true listen, Judd, like, you're endearing yourself to me every time I turn around when I hear these things, because I'm like, listen, she's making it happen. And look, folks, I mean this honestly, and from talking to Mary Beth, from checking out her website, knowing what she's got going on. She is a trainer also. If you're looking for somebody to help you out, she talked about the continuous legal education, the medical side. I think personally, completely sidebar, we could probably do an entire show on what I'm about to say. I feel like anytime the U.S. government puts the words war on in front of something, you can just go ahead and shit in your hat and wear it, because it's never going to end. FYI, folks, look at any war on poverty. That was started during the Nixon administration. Tell me how that's working out for us. War on drugs. That's the Reagan administration. Tell me how that's working out for us. War on terrorism. That's the Bush administration. Tell me how that's working out with us. Anytime we put war on, I've said this 100 million times, and I'd love to get your quick thought on this because we're getting close to the end, Mary Beth. I've always said, take the war on drugs, end it, be done with that term, be done with all the money that gets dumped into it. I personally, and maybe this is because I'm not recovering in any way, I feel like, you know what? I'd rather see it legalized, and the billions upon billions of dollars that are spent on the war on go to recovery and education programs similar to what we did to cigarettes. Because the only reason we did it to cigarettes is because, my opinion is, the insurance industry was like, hey, we're paying for stuff that we don't want to pay for, so you guys need to go ahead and deal with this. What are your thoughts about that?
I absolutely support decriminalization of drugs for personal use, and taking the money that we use for incarceration and police and all of that, and repurposing it to medical treatment, harm reduction, employment supports, housing supports, addressing other health issues. Absolutely. It's a much better use of our tax dollars. It'll be much more effective. The war on drugs, we've lost it. We've spent billions and billions and billions, and we are in we had a record number of overdose deaths last year. So look how well it's worked.
Yeah, I have a son who was in the Coast Guard, and I remember him sending me a picture one time of the back of his ship. And he was like, and I don't remember the number. I don't know why 14 million sticks in my head, but he was like, Dad, we have millions of dollars in drugs on the back of our boat. And I went, that's interesting, son. What happened to him? He goes, I don't know. The DEA came and got him. I ain't never seen a news report that said junkies walking around the street, can't find anything. They've all decided to give up.
It's true. It's true. And look, it's also it's just not a good use of resources. I mean, we could use those resources. I will say this: overdose death is the number one cause of death in 18 to 35-year-olds right now. Number one cause of death. It also, you can treat 3 or 4 people for the same amount of money as incarcerating one, and so much better use of our dollars.
I love calling you Your Honor. Your Honor, I absolutely agree 1000% with you there. It makes no sense to me. It has never made any sense to me. I'm also very anti, like, when you incarcerate somebody and they get out and they've served their time, that they then need to do another 5 to 7 years of parole where you hawk over them and then employers won't hire them. And we treat it, and it's like we all get taught, hey, when a kid gets in trouble, don't hold that against them or they'll never be a better child. But when we have grown folks that get out of prisons, we turn around and we go, I'm watching everything you do. You can't have land. You can't have a gun. You can't vote. We're just going to keep jacking you up for the rest of your life because you made this mistake. I'm a hell of a conservative, ain't I?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, and we have 500,000 people in jail today for possession. I mean, not all the other crimes. It's just not it's not effective, and it's not a good use, and it's not even enforced in a fair way, right? I mean, if you're a rich white kid, you're not going to jail.
Well, what's that great saying? Crimes that have fines weren't made for rich people. Yeah. I never met a rich person that gave a shit about a fine. So, but Judge, we're getting ready to close the bar now. Don't log off on me afterwards. We got to talk for just a couple of minutes after the show. I know we talked about this before. You've binge watched all 230 some episodes we're at. You're fully immersed in the bar culture here, but I got to still remind you, this is the last part of the show. On every show, the guest always gets the final word. So, Your Honor, what is the final word?
I guess I would just like to say, hopefully my story is an encouragement. I mean, remember, child abuse, sexual assault, meth for, most of 15 years. And I didn't get sober until I was 32. It wasn't like I got sober young, and yet happy, productive life. So I hope that's a message to the person who's struggling, that there's still hope and there's a way forward, but also to their friends and families, that there is a positive, happy life, but we can just get them the help they need to get out of the chaos and misery that is addiction.
Alrighty, folks, be sure to push your stool in. This has been a Second Front podcast presentation found on Apple, Spotify, and wherever podcasts can be found.